The automotive world rarely witnesses a confrontation that feels less like a mechanical rebuild and more like a shifting of power. Yet that is exactly what unfolded when Matt Armstrong set out to restore a wrecked Bugatti Chiron. What initially appeared to be another ambitious project quickly evolved into a test of authority, ownership, and control within the rarefied world of hypercars. When Matt Rimac, representing Bugatti, delivered a carefully constructed explanation outlining why such a rebuild should only occur under factory oversight, the tone was deliberate, technical, and calm. He emphasized safety protocols, proprietary calibration systems, specialized training, and the risks associated with structural carbon fiber repairs. The message appeared clear. The Chiron is not simply a car, but an engineering ecosystem requiring factory-level stewardship. For a moment, it seemed the conversation had ended before it truly began. But in the digital age, statements rarely remain unchallenged. What followed transformed the narrative. Armstrong responded with measured skepticism, highlighting discrepancies and raising practical questions about parts availability, shared components, and independent expertise. Other creators and industry observers joined in, dissecting the claims, comparing repair standards, and examining whether exclusivity had blurred into restriction. Suddenly, the discussion expanded beyond one damaged hypercar. It became a broader debate about ownership rights, transparency, and the influence of independent creators. And then, something unexpected happened. Silence. Bugatti did not issue further statements. Rimac offered no follow-up clarification. Official channels moved on to other announcements. This absence of response became as significant as the original statement itself. Silence in this context carries weight. For some, it suggests confidence, the belief that technical reality will ultimately validate the manufacturer's caution. For others, it hints at strategic restraint, an understanding that further engagement could amplify the very questions a company would rather avoid. By stepping back, Bugatti effectively shifted the burden of proof onto Armstrong. Every repair, every workaround, every milestone now unfolds without corporate commentary, leaving the audience to interpret progress independently. This dynamic intensifies the drama. The rebuild continues, but the opponent is invisible, present only through earlier words and the lingering authority of a global luxury brand. This situation reveals why Bugatti might feel uneasy. The Chiron's value rests not only on performance but on mystique, the belief that its complexity demands exclusive knowledge. Armstrong's project challenges that narrative through transparency. Cameras document dismantling, analysis, and reconstruction, turning secrecy into shared understanding. The more viewers grasp the engineering, the more they question why access must remain limited. This does not diminish the car's brilliance. Rather, it reframes it as extraordinary yet comprehensible. For a brand built partly on exclusivity, that shift in perception matters. If independent specialists can navigate the complexity, the argument for total control weakens. At the same time, the psychological dimension deepens attention. Active opposition can energize a challenger, but silence creates uncertainty. Armstrong continues his rebuild without knowing whether Bugatti views the effort as irrelevant or threatening. Each success becomes louder in the absence of rebuttal, while each difficulty raises questions about whether the manufacturer's warnings were justified. This ambiguity sustains public fascination. The audience becomes judge and jury, interpreting progress without official guidance. In this sense, Bugatti's silence becomes a strategic instrument, shaping the narrative without adding new words. The broader implications extend beyond one workshop. The debate touches on modern ownership, the right to repair, and the evolving relationship between manufacturers and independent expertise. Hypercars once existed in a closed ecosystem where knowledge flowed only through authorized channels. Digital platforms have changed that reality. Skilled creators now document processes once hidden, inviting global audiences into spaces previously reserved for specialists. Armstrong's rebuild embodies this shift. It demonstrates how transparency can coexist with sophistication, and how curiosity can challenge established hierarchies. Ultimately, why Bugatti is suddenly worried about Matt Armstrong lies in his convergence of visibility, influence, and evolving expectations. The rebuild is no longer just a technical challenge. It is a narrative about control and autonomy. Whether Bugatti's silence reflects confidence or caution, it has amplified the story, turning one damaged hypercar into a symbol of changing dynamics in the luxury automotive world. As the project continues, Every step carries meaning beyond the garage, illustrating how modern creators, armed with skill and an audience, can reshape conversations once dominated solely by manufacturers. The unfolding tension between Matt Armstrong and Bugatti has evolved far beyond a simple rebuild of a damaged Bugatti Chiron. It had become a case study in modern industrial power, narrative control, and the fragile psychology of exclusivity. What makes this moment so significant is not just the engineering challenge of restoring one of the most complex road cars ever built, but the way the entire process is being broadcast, dissected, and debated in real time across a global audience. When Matt Armstrong stepped forward with a structured, highly technical explanation defending Bugatti's position, he did more than outline safety protocols, proprietary systems, and factory-level requirements. He reinforced a philosophy that hypercars exist within a controlled ecosystem where knowledge, access, and responsibility are tightly regulated. From carbon fiber structural integrity to airbag recalibration systems and specialized diagnostic tools, the message was clear. This is not a machine meant for open interpretation. It is an engineered environment that demands absolute precision and manufacturer oversight. But in the digital era, authority no longer ends with a final word from a CEO. The response from Armstrong and other creators immediately fractured that sense of closure. Questions were raised not out of emotion, but out of technical curiosity, about parts shared across wider automotive groups, about repair feasibility outside official networks, and about whether the boundaries described by Bugatti were truly absolute or simply strategically enforced. As those discussions spread across platforms, something unusual happened. The narrative stopped belonging to the manufacturer. It became collective. Engineers, enthusiasts, and independent specialists began contributing analysis, effectively crowdsourcing scrutiny of claims that were once accepted without public challenge. In that environment, silence from Bugatti did not read as absence. It read as strategy. This silence is where the real tension emerges. For some observers, it signals confidence, an institution so secure in its engineering standards that it sees no need to engage in public debate. From that perspective, the rebuild is irrelevant to their core clientele, who operate in a financial and experimental world far removed from YouTube documentation and independent garages. In that interpretation, Bugatti has already said everything necessary through Armstrong's original statement, and any further engagement would only dilute authority or elevate the status of a challenger. But for others, the silence feels calculated in a different way, less about indifference and more about containment. By refusing to respond, Bugatti avoids amplifying claims that could erode the mystique surrounding its vehicles, particularly the idea that only the manufacturer can truly service or understand them at the highest level. The deeper issue lies in what Armstrong's rebuild represents visually and psychologically. Each exposed component, each successful repair, and each workaround documented on camera weakens the traditional boundary between manufacturer knowledge and public capability. The Bugatti Chiron is not just being repaired, it is being deconstructed in front of millions of viewers who are witnessing that complexity, while immense, is not mystical. That shift is subtle but powerful. Luxury engineering has always relied on a degree of perceived inaccessibility, a belief that extraordinary price points reflect not only performance but exclusive understanding. When independent creators demonstrate comprehension of systems once considered untouchable, the emotional foundation of that exclusivity begins to shift. At the same time, the psychological pressure intensifies on all sides. Armstrong operates in a space where every milestone is measured against an unseen benchmark, the manufacturer that refuses to engage further. Progress is no longer just technical, it becomes symbolic. Every solved issue suggests independence. Every unresolved problem raises a question of whether the original warnings were protective or restrictive. Meanwhile, Bugatti's silence creates a vacuum that the audience fills with interpretation, debate, and speculation. In that vacuum, perception becomes reality. The absence of response becomes a statement in itself, one that can be read as confidence, caution, or quiet anticipation of an outcome that will eventually speak louder than any press release. What makes this moment particularly significant is how it reflects a broader transformation in modern industry. The relationship between manufacturers and consumers is no longer one-directional. Platforms have turned documentation into influence, and influence into leverage. A single well-documented project can now challenge assumptions that were once enforced through closed systems and limited access. The right to repair conversation, once confined to policy discussions and technical forums, now unfolds in real time through storytelling, visuals, and global engagement. Armstrong's rebuild sits directly within that shift, acting as both a technical endeavor and a cultural signal. For Bugatti, the concern, whether acknowledged or not, lies not in the failure or success of one project, but in what it demonstrates to the wider world. If independent expertise can navigate systems designed for exclusivity, then exclusivity itself must evolve. If audiences begin to believe that complexity does not equal dependency, then the entire structure controlled servicing and brand authority faces reinterpretation. This does not diminish the engineering excellence of the Chiron or the prestige of Bugatti's legacy. Instead, it challenges the assumption that such excellence can only be validated through controlled access, and so the silence persists. Not as emptiness, but as pressure. Not as disengagement, but as unresolved tension suspended over every bolt tightened and every system reassembled in Armstrong's workshop. In that silence, the story continues to grow, shaped as much by what is not said as by what is built. And as the rebuild progresses, one truth becomes increasingly clear. This is no longer just about a hypercar restoration. It is about who gets to define reality in an age where expertise is no longer confined to institutions, but broadcast to the world in real time. The escalating story between Matt Armstrong and Bugatti has now moved into a far more complex and symbolic phase, where the physical reconstruction of a wrecked Bugatti Chiron is no longer the central focus. It is the meaning behind the rebuild that is driving global attention. What began as a highly technical salvage project has transformed into a public examination of authority, ownership, and the invisible boundaries imposed by hyperluxury manufacturers. When Matt Armstrong released his detailed explanation defending Bugatti's position, it was designed to close the conversation with precision and technical authority. He laid out an intricate system of safeguards, factory-only diagnostics, proprietary calibration systems, carbon fiber structural protocols, airbag reprogramming requirements, and strict certification standards that even authorized service centers must meet. The message was unmistakable. This level of engineering exists within a tightly controlled ecosystem where safety and brand integrity depend on centralized oversight. Yet what followed revealed something far more powerful than any technical briefing. The internet did not close the conversation. It expanded it. Matt Armstrong responded not with confrontation, but with documentation, analysis, and methodical questioning. Independent creators and engineers joined in, dissecting claims, comparing industry practices, and highlighting parallels with other high-performance automotive platforms. As each layer was examined publicly, the narrative shifted from why it cannot be done to how it is being done anyway. And in that shift, a fundamental tension emerged between controlled expertise and distributed knowledge. Then came the most influential factor of all, silence from Bugatti. No further statements. No rebuttals. No technical clarifications beyond the original presentation by Matt Armstrong. In traditional corporate environments, silence might suggest closure, but in the digital ecosystem, silence becomes part of the narrative itself. It is interpreted, analyzed, and filled with meaning by the audience. Some view it as confidence, a belief that the manufacturer has already stated all necessary truths and sees no need to engage further. Others interpret it as strategic restraint, a deliberate decision to avoid amplifying controversy that gains strength with every response. What makes this silence particularly impactful is that it shifts the entire burden of proof onto Armstrong. Every component he removes, every repair he completes, every obstacle he overcomes is no longer just a mechanical milestone. It becomes evidence in a global debate. If he succeeds, it challenges the assumption that hypercars exist beyond independent comprehension. If he fails, it validates the manufacturer's warnings without them needing to re-enter the conversation. Either outcome benefits Bugatti's narrative position, which may explain why stepping back becomes, paradoxically, a form of control. But beneath this strategic surface lies a deeper disruption, the redefinition of ownership itself. The Bugatti Chiron is legally owned by an individual, yet functionally dependent on the manufacturer's ecosystem. Parts access, software authorization, diagnostic systems, and repair protocols are all concentrated within the brand's controlled network. Armstrong's rebuild exposes this contradiction in real time. Viewers see a physical object that is owned, yet restricted, purchased, yet dependent, available, yet controlled. This contradiction is no longer theoretical. It is visible on screen, in garages, in dismantled components, and in real-world repair attempts that, as the rebuild progresses, the psychological dimension intensifies. The absence of corporate engagement creates an unusual dynamic where Armstrong is effectively working against an invisible benchmark. He is not just rebuilding a car. He is reconstructing a system that is not actively responding, yet still implicitly present. That silence creates pressure. Every breakthrough feels like progress against resistance that is not spoken but assumed. Every challenge raises a question of whether unseen limits will eventually stop the project entirely. At the same time, the audience becomes an active participant in the process. Millions of viewers analyze each update, debate technical decisions, and share interpretations across platforms. This transforms a rebuild into a distributed investigation rather than a private repair. In earlier decades, such a project would have been confined to workshop walls. Now it unfolds in public, with global scrutiny acting as both amplifier and judge. That visibility is precisely what makes the situation sensitive for Bugatti, not because of one damaged Chiron, but because of what it reveals about modern transparency. The broader implication extends far beyond a single manufacturer. Across industries, the balance between proprietary control and user autonomy is being reevaluated. Luxury automotive engineering, once protected by exclusivity and limited access, now exists in a world where documentation, analysis, and replication are increasingly visible. Armstrong's work does not dismantle Bugatti's engineering. It dismantled the perception that such engineering is unreachable. That distinction is critical. Prestige survives on admiration, but also on distance. When distance collapses into understanding, the emotional framework of exclusivity begins to change. This is why the situation carries such weight. It is not a dispute over parts or procedures. It is a collision between two eras. One era is built on controlled knowledge, restricted access, and centralized authority. The other is built on open documentation, decentralized expertise, and global participation. The Chiron rebuild sits at the exact intersection of these worlds, turning a single vehicle into a symbol of transition, and in the middle of that transition, silence continues to shape perception. Whether it represents confidence, calculation, or restraint, it functions as a force that directs attention back to the rebuild itself. The more the manufacturer steps back, the more the audience leans forward. The more unanswered questions remain, the more the project grows in cultural significance. What was once a technical salvage operation has become a live demonstration of how modern narratives are formed, not through statements alone, but through absence, observation, and interpretation. Ultimately, why Bugatti is suddenly concerned about Matt Armstrong is not because he poses a direct technical threat, but because he represents a structural one. He represents visibility where there was once opacity, accessibility where there was once restriction, and interpretation where there was once authority. And as the rebuild continues, one truth becomes unavoidable. The outcome will not only determine the fate of a single hypercar, it will influence how the world understands ownership, expertise, and control in the modern automotive age.